what we'll do is I'm going to talk for about an hour. There's a lot to cover this evening. Obviously, it's a huge topic. It's one of the areas that I'm most passionate about, both through my professional experience and also through my own family experience. We have autism and ADHD in my family. Lots to cover, but lots to tell you about, and we'll open up for questions at the end, and I'll stay for 15 minutes or so, as long as you'd like to ask me some questions. So let's get started. So most of you know who I am. Just as a reminder, I'm a registered nutritionist and clinical nutritional therapist. As I said, I work in one-to-one clinic, and I also do a lot of training. Like I said, I have my own family experience in this area as well. So we're really going to dive into how to support the brain with nutrition. The brain is a really hungry organ. It counts for such a small part of our body weight, about 2% of our body weight, but it actually takes about 20% of our energy from our food. So it's a really hungry organ, and we need to make sure that we nourish it as much as we possibly can. So today we're going to cover with a neurodivergent lens, why does nutrition matter? And we'll really be thinking about, and this is particularly relevant in neurodiversity, what we can add in, like what are the nutrients that we can, the foods that we can really add in that are going to help support those people, those children that might be, neurodivergent. So protein for glycemic control is going to be really important, and for building neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and acetylcholine. Fats are absolutely vital for brain health, and we'll zoom in a little bit more on some of the key vitamins. We'll look at the gut-brain axis and microbiome balance, really an area that has been researched a lot. And we'll touch on sensory issues around food, but I'm going to cover that more in the webinar that I'm doing in a couple of weeks' time, where we'll really dive into restrictive eating. Can I just ask, if you have got your sound on, can you just mute your sound, please? Because I'm just hearing someone who's probably just come in recently. If you could just pop yourselves on mute, that would be great, just so that we don't get your sound on the recording. So let's get started. Just a reminder that every single body and every brain is biologically unique, of course. If you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. I'm obviously giving you general guidance here, but obviously do listen to your families and grown-ups that you work with, and any medical advice that, of course, has been given. This is not alternative. I'm a complementary health care support worker. This is about really supporting a young person's ability to thrive. As a mum of an autistic ADHD teenager, I am really passionate about being neuro-affirming as much as I possibly can, but I am learning all the time. I think the language we use in this area is really super important, but I don't always get it right. But I do my best, because I think we're just learning in this area all the time. And this is not about, curing autism or ADHD, of course not. I just want to make that really clear here. It's not about that. It's about, we all have differences, and neurodivergent people have differences in the way that their brains function, and the structure, and how brains are made, and how, that impacts them. And what we're trying to really do with nutrition is support a child's ability to be their best, to help reduce some of the exacerbations, some of the challenges that are potentially faced. But it's not about fitting everybody into, this is a normal brain and this is how everybody should be, because obviously, neurodivergence makes the world so beautiful, right? And just to say as well, nutrition, of course, can even support, your standard medication and medical advice as well. For example, there is some evidence that ADHD medication, for example, certain nutrient deficiencies can mean that it's not so effective, particularly things like zinc, iron, magnesium. So if a child is in a better nutritional status, that might also impact in a positive way the efficacy of the medication and the response that they have to medication. So, I think it's really important to remember that. So neurodiversity, I'm sure you're all aware of this term. It is an umbrella term, right? It covers so many things. There is some talk that perhaps we might get rid of all the individual diagnoses and perhaps, just have this neurodivergence umbrella. Who knows? yeah, it covers lots of things. Obviously, ADHD, ADD, autism, dyslexia, epilepsy. People might not realize that epilepsy is often put under that neurodivergence umbrella. Dyscalculia, executive function difficulties, highly sensitive person, OCD, sensory processing, ODD, PDA. Lots and lots of, I'm going to put conditions like that because I don't really like the word diagnoses because it medicalizes so much these conditions. But it's this umbrella term. And so I've kind of umbrellaed a little bit today because we only have 1 hour, rather than going into all the specifics of all the individual, differences that we've seen there. So with a neurodivergent lens, why does good nutrition matter? Why is it important? Well, on a fundamental level for all children, whether they're neurodivergent or not, nutrition is really important for those building blocks of life. So it provides fuel, energy, it helps us to build, so all our bones and our skin and our teeth and our nail and our hairs and our brain. We need nutrition to build. Think of it like the Lego, the building blocks, if you like. And we also need optimal nutrition to be able to protect our health, to repair, and to maintain. So it's a really important part of that, supporting every single individual's ability to achieve and be their best. And if we really think about with a neurodivergent lens, what we know is that, some people who are neurodivergent have a higher risk of nutritional deficiencies. And that might be for many reasons because of nervous system being under pressure, so higher stress levels. Yeah, that round peg, square hole analogy, square peg, round hole, whichever way you put it round. That higher stress is going to burn through nutrients. We know that neurodivergent children and adults, their nervous system is going to be more challenged, and that does burn through nutrients due to the higher release of stress hormones. Potentially more gut issues. So you tend to see more diarrhea, more constipation in neurodivergent children. Challenges with sleep, which also can impact our stress levels and then impact our risk of nutritional deficiencies and how we digest and absorb our food. We see a lot of sensory challenges around food, potentially overeating, but also we see a lot of undereating. You might see neurodivergent children being diagnosed with something called ARFID, which is that extreme avoidant food restrictive intake disorder, where you can see some children get really, really limited on the foods that they eat. And we know that some neurodivergent children have a higher need for some nutrients, which we'll learn about this evening: zinc and iron and omega-3 being classic and key examples that have been researched a lot. And the brain can become deficient. So what you can see is that nutrition may not be playing a part in the development of neurodiversity, but when you see, for example, an autistic child who is very sensory around food and they really struggle with getting in key nutrients, the brain actually can become nutrient deficient, which then can exacerbate challenges. We tend to see, when the brain is more deficient, we might see heightened sensory challenges around food. We might see more anxiety, difficulty relaxing, more hyperactive, impulsive type symptoms, for example. So let's dig a little bit more into why we need that nutrition. So we specifically need it to build our neurotransmitters. Remember, I was talking about nutrition as the building blocks. Think of it almost like Lego bricks. So our neurotransmitters, we need nutrition to build it. So amino acids, which come from protein, and then there's lots of vitamins and minerals which we need to be able to make those neurotransmitters, as I'll show you in a moment. So when I say neurotransmitters, that's your brain chemicals. So things like serotonin and dopamine, which dopamine you might have heard a lot about when it comes to things like ADHD. We need nutrition to be able to feed that gut-brain axis. So one of the things I see commonly with children with sensory issues around food, not wanting to eat vegetables and fruits, and that's a big food group that is going to really help to feed a healthy gut microbiome. That's all the organisms that live in our digestive system. And there's a lot of research that we're seeing neurodivergent individuals tend to have an altered gut microbiome, and that is thought to then really impact that gut brain axis. Our gut and our brain are talking to each other all the time. We need nutrition for detoxification, so the removal of heavy metals that might be neurotoxins. We need it to support blood sugar control. We know particularly that glycemic control is really, really important, particularly for stabilizing our behavior and our mood. We need nutrition to be able to balance our immunity and inflammation. And with neurodivergence, we often see there might be some immune system challenges. And it provides that complementary approach to some of the challenges that might be experienced by those who are neurodivergent. So poor sleep, constipation, diarrhea, weight management, muscle tension, anxiety. Nutrition can be helpful in lots of these areas. And just a point, I mentioned this when I did the training before Christmas. You don't have to have a low BMI, body mass index, to be malnourished. Just because a child is a healthy weight or overweight, that doesn't mean they're not potentially malnourished. They might be getting enough energy, calories from food, but they might not be getting enough of the vitamins, minerals, and key macronutrients like fiber, for example, that they need to be healthy. So you're not always going to see malnourishment in a person or a child who is underweight. You might see it even in a person who is medically diagnosed as clinically obese, can be malnourished because they are low in key essential nutrients that we need for health. So let's zoom in a little bit more on neurotransmitters, because this is a really important part of thinking about nutrition for neurodiversity. And so lots of neurotransmitters you'll see here. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you a science lesson today, but I just thought it'd be nice just to see them on the screen, because these are some of the things you might have heard of in your work. One of the ones I like to talk about a lot is this one at the bottom left, GABA. GABA is a really calming neurotransmitter. It's like the off switch. It's the balance to glutamate. Glutamate, you might think, oh, I've heard that word before, glutamate. So if you think of monosodium glutamate, MSG, we heard a lot about that in the 90s and the noughties when it came to children's health. MSG can be a trigger for hyperactivity, potentially, in some children and some adults. MSG now has been taken out of a lot of foods, but it is still in lots of foods. For example, I checked a Doritos pack recently, it's in there. So GABA helps to balance the glutamate. We need some glutamate in our body. So the MSG actually stimulates our glutamate receptors. So a little bit is fine, but too much is not good. And we need glutamate for learning. It's our memory neurotransmitter, but too much can cause hyperactivity. And GABA is the kind of the braking mechanism, if you like, that helps to balance that glutamate. And again, we need good nutrition to be able to produce it and respond to it. Zinc and vitamin B6 are really, really super important there. So you can see all of these neurotransmitters, we need to get them into balance as much as we possibly can. So let's think a little bit about some of the nutrition needed. So I'll just give this example here. It might look a bit complex, but don't worry. Like if you're thinking, oh my God, it's a science lesson, just after Christmas, I can't cope. What I just want to show you is how important nutrition is. And I like to draw these diagrams because I think it just really shows you actually how important it is getting in the right nutrition. So these two on the left here, phenylalanine and tyrosine, these are amino acids. So in a child that doesn't eat very much protein, like you see it quite a lot in children that have sensory needs. They don't like eating meat, fish. They're not great with chewing kind of protein foods. If a child is not getting enough protein in their diet and they're not getting enough amino acids from that protein, they're really going to struggle to make dopamine. So what our body does is it converts that phenylalanine into tyrosine, into L-dopa, into dopamine. And dopamine is that attention neurotransmitter. It's a really, really important one across lots of neurodiversities, but particularly for ADHD, that kind of inattentive or that more impulsive type ADHD. Now, we need to get those amino acids in, but we also need lots of really important nutrients to be able to make those conversions. We call these cofactors in nutrition. So iron and folate make that conversion there. So we need those nutrients to be able to make that conversion. We need zinc and vitamin B6 to be able to make dopamine. It's really, really super important. And then once we've got our dopamine, we need to be able to convert it into noradrenaline, which is really important for that executive function. And we need copper and vitamin C to be able to do that. So again, think about those children that really struggle to eat any fruit or fresh vegetables, where that's our main sources of vitamin C, you can see how that kind of conversion might be compromised, by certain food groups not being eaten in the diet. So our diets really are changing. I covered a little bit of this before Christmas, but I'm just going to pick up on a few key things that I think is really important to look at. Yeah. So the average in the UK, on average, about 60% of food consumed by children comes from ultra processed foods. There's quite a lot of series on at the moment. Typical January, isn't it? There's quite a lot of series on the TV, all about ultra processed foods. There's quite a good one on Channel 4 at the moment if you want to learn more about ultra processed foods by Tim Spector, and they're helping families to cut the ultra processed foods out of their diet and seeing what impact it has on their families' health and well-being. So it's definitely one to have a look at. We know that less than 1 in 5 primary school children eat 5 a day. Yeah, so less than 1 in 5 eat 5 a day, and 5 a day is really a minimum, not a target. Almost a third of primary age school children eat less than 1 vegetable a day. And low fruit and veg intake correlates with poor mental health across adolescence. And, in neurodivergence, we often see, co-symptoms like anxiety, like OCD, like depression, for example. So, supporting the brain as much as we possibly can is so important. High versus low intake of ultra processed foods linked with, as I said, anxiety, sleep problems, and other mental health symptoms, 22% increase in depression. And we know that there's certain nutrient shortfalls in preschool children as well. 88% of 1.5 to 3-year-olds don't meet fiber targets. We're going to talk about that in a moment because I'm going to cover a little bit more about the gut microbiome. We need to get enough fiber in our diet to be able to support a healthy gut microbiome. More than 10% are at risk of iron deficiency. And so what we're talking about then, dopamine, right? We need iron to be able to make dopamine. Really super important. And we need zinc to be able to respond to and make dopamine. 21% of 4-year-olds have insufficient zinc intake. So you can see where that risk potentially might be exacerbated by what we're eating. And we know that long-term intake of ultra-processed foods has even been linked with differences in brain morphology. And the researchers here say that may explain the relationship between dietary patterns and neurodevelopment in children. So that's not to say that a poor diet causes neurodivergence. There's many, many things that might contribute to neurodivergence. But dietary patterns may exacerbate some of that genetic risk, particularly. And it's not just in junk food, of course. Ultra-processed ingredients are found in lots and lots of foods, including baby and toddler foods. So what I want to focus on is just remind you, I know some of you were here last time, but it's always good to have a little recap. Now, when it comes to brain health, having a steady supply of glucose in our blood is one of the most important factors. And it's particularly important for your children that potentially are demonstrating more hyperactive, impulsive type behavior. Trying to work on keeping that blood sugar more balanced can be really, really helpful. And we'll talk through what that means in a moment. So what we're thinking about is when we eat, our blood sugar naturally goes up and down. We want it to be on this nice, gentle up and down pattern. And we don't really want to see our blood sugar doing these big swings up and down throughout the day. If you imagine a child that perhaps has, let's say, worst case scenario, I don't know, a bowl of Cocoa Pops for breakfast and a can of fizzy drink. It happens in preschool, I see it, or a can of Monster, I see in primary school children. We've got lots of sugar, lots of stimulants, and very low protein, very low fat, very low fiber. What's going to happen is that child's blood sugar is going to go up way too high too quickly. And what we're going to see is high levels of insulin being released because the body doesn't like the blood sugar to be up too high. And then when we get that big release of too much, the body takes too much sugar out of the blood and we get this big crash down, right? And we then start releasing stress hormones, cortisol, for example. And what do we know about neurodivergent children is that often their nervous system is already quite dysregulated, which is going to impact the release of stress hormones and that blood sugar swings already. So we're then adding to that stress load with more stress hormones. And what we tend to see is as that blood sugar swings, we tend to see more hyperactive, impulsive type behavior. So it's exacerbating potentially, an underlying pattern that is already there. It's potentially kind of adding fuel to the fire, if you like. There was some research, it's quite old research now, that did also suggest that young people with ADHD particularly responded in a much stronger way to sugar than those that didn't have ADHD. I kind of liken it to ripples in a pond analogy. If you imagine two ponds and you've got a person with ADHD and a person without ADHD, and they both throw the same size stone in a pond, the person with the ADHD is going to have much bigger waves. And that's potentially how that ADHD might be responding to sugar. They're just not going to tolerate sugar so well, and they're not going to be able to potentially bring their blood sugar back into balance. And you then might see much more symptoms of dysregulation, which might include dizziness, tiredness, irritability, mood swings, crying spells, hungry, headaches, difficulty sleeping, clumsiness, poor stress management, for example. And they are classic symptoms of blood sugar dysregulation, which you commonly see in neurodivergent children as well. So we're kind of adding that fuel to the fire when the blood sugar is dysregulated. So we really want to try to work on balancing blood sugar as much as we possibly can. And so whenever I'm talking to families about food, I like to focus on the things that we should add into our diet rather than what we should take away. For those of you that weren't there before in our December webinar, my view is a lot of families, they're busy, right? Time poor, life is super, super busy. And sometimes food gets kind of pushed to the bottom of our agenda a little bit, and I understand why. We hear so much, don't we, about what you shouldn't eat. Particularly at the moment, it's all about ultra processed foods. Don't eat this, don't eat that. That families can get a little bit like they don't want to hear it anymore because they're just so fed up of, hearing what they shouldn't eat. If you can flip that around when you talk to families that you work with about what to add in rather than don't eat that. And the ultra processed foods are really addictive. Sugar is really, really addictive. So first, focus on the things that we should add into our diet. And that works really nicely with children to help them have a balanced relationship with food as well. So really encouraging the things to add in. So what helps to keep our blood sugar more balanced is foods high in fiber, complex, slow releasing carbohydrates. Yeah, so that's your vegetables, that's a little bit of fruit, that's things that are higher in fiber rather than your white carbohydrates. So rather than your white toast or white bagel or white crumpets, we want to be looking for things that have got a little bit more whole grain in, particularly as children get a little bit older. So things like porridge for breakfast, or Weetabix or shredded wheat rather than cornflakes or Rice Krispies. We want to be going towards whole grain bread. We want to be going towards brown rice, for example. We want potatoes with skins on, because all of that adds more fiber, and that's going to help keep our blood sugar levels more balanced. Plenty of vegetables, pulses like lentils and chickpeas and those kind of things. We also want to add in plenty of protein. Protein is digested much more slowly, and that helps to keep the blood sugar levels more balanced. We'll go through protein sources in a second. And we also want to be getting in healthy fats as well. Not all fat is bad. We tend to hear fat bad, right? Things should be low fat, but actually it's about eating the right fats, which we'll cover in a second. So proteins found in meat, fish, seafood, eggs, dairy, nuts, seeds, and nut butter. Obviously, you might not have those in your setting, but just encouraging parents to be using those at home. Beans, pulses, and soya, quinoa, and buckwheat. So these are all protein-rich foods. And just to say, obviously, today, I will make sure that Nicola gets the slides from today. So don't worry if you're not scribbling all of this down. That's absolutely fine. I will make sure the slides get sent to you as well. We want to be moving to whole grains. So you might, if a child is used to white and they don't want to swap onto whole grain, you might start with 50-50. Might try to keep the skins on potatoes. You might move to whole grain pasta or lentil pasta or something like that. Now, obviously, in this group of children, neurodivergent children, you might have a high percentage of children that are sensory around food and struggle with change. And so you might need to do this slowly. The early years foundation stage guidance gives clear instructions that the advice should be followed unless there is good reason not to. So obviously we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks more and a bit more at the end today. If you have a child who is a restrictive eater, you're going to struggle to make sudden change on lots and lots of levels, potentially all at once. You might not, not every neurodivergent child has sensory issues that make them want to not want to change their food. Actually, I find in this food group, in this demographic, a lot of children absolutely love lots of different foods. Sometimes you find autistic children love really strong flavors that you would not even anticipate that they would like. So it's not always the case that they're going to be resistant to change, but of course it can be the case for some. And then we're thinking about adding fibre from vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, pulses, obviously nuts at home if you can't have them in your setting, seeds at home if you can't have them in your setting, and even herbs and spices add a little bit of fibre as well. And a little bit of natural sugar to sweeten second dishes. We don't call them desserts anymore in setting, do we? Call them second dishes according to the early years foundation stage guidelines. But not having too much, of course. Even natural sugar is still sugar. So we can sweeten things with fruits. For example, you might put bananas in baking or berries into porridge. It was lovely to see the chat as we came in that some of you have tried the beetroot brownies that we talked about last time. Honey, maple syrup and agave, they are still sugar. So we only use little bits occasionally. Of course, no honey for under 12-month-old children. Smoothies, not juices. We definitely shouldn't be giving juice to children. We can give occasional smoothies, but they should be very little fruit and adding in some oats or some proteins like yogurt or milk or some seeds or something like that. Dried fruit or tinned fruit can be used in baking or as a dessert with some yogurt, but just a little bit. And you can use dried fruit in baking, but not on its own. You can use it as part of a meal. Sweet spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and allspice and vanilla are also really, really nice ways to sweeten without using sugar. And just bear in mind when you're reading food labels that low sugar does not mean no added sweeteners. We don't want to be putting lots of sweeteners into children's diet either because they drive a sweet tooth and they also can impact the gut microbiome. Aside from blood sugar balance, protein is also really important, as I said earlier, for building those neurotransmitters. So lots of function for neurotransmitters as well. I'm not going to spend too much time covering fat because we did cover that in the training a few weeks ago. But I'm just going to cover it with a bit more of a neurodivergent lens so that you can understand why it is so important. Our brain is over 60% fat, and every single part of neurotransmission, so that's sending messages through our brain, does require particularly omega fat. Omega fats, there's lots of words for them. You might have heard the words polyunsaturated, long chain, omega-3 fatty acids or omega-6 fatty acids. And we need to make sure that we're getting enough omega-3 in our diet. It's the most anti-inflammatory fat that we can eat. And we tend to get too much omega-6 in our diet. Omega-3, we'll talk about where it comes from in a moment. There's lots of research, particularly around ADHD and omega-3. The DHA, Oxford Learning and Behaviour Studies evidence, for example, this is quite an old study now on children aged 7 to 9. They found that higher blood levels of DHA, which is one of our long-chain omega-3s, is associated with better reading, better working memory, improved behaviour, better attention and concentration, and better sleep. Another 2014 study found that omega-3 levels are reduced in children with ADHD and found benefits for getting in more omega-3 for inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And actually, it's one of the things we tend to see that ADHDers particularly tend to have lower blood levels of omega-3 despite changes, differences in their dietary intake. It's not always about the dietary intake. What we think is that ADHDers particularly have a higher need for omega-3. It's really important for that kind of executive function part of the brain. It helps to support neurotransmission. It's really important for regulating serotonin release and any messages being sent through the body. And we also need adequate omega-3 for vision, for our immunity, for blood flow, heart health, hormone balance, gene expression. It's really, really important. For signs of essential fat deficiency, we talked about this last time. I'll let you just have a little read through there while I have a sip of my tea. I think just to let you know what the pimples on the backs of the arms is. You see it a lot in children, particularly teenage children, where it's just lots of bumps sort of on this area here in the arm, like right on the backs of the arms. It's not eczema, so it's not open, it's not weeping, it's just lots of little raised bumps. It looks like raw chicken skin. That's often the kind of way of describing it. And it's really likely that a child is going to have a higher need for omega-3 if they don't eat fish, they're not eating any nuts, they're not eating any seeds. I mean, these are foods that a lot of children just don't eat. So we get omega-3s from oily fish. When you think about oily fish and you want to know which ones are oily fish, think of the word smash: salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring, obviously pilchards. We get a little bit in trout as well. Most children should be eating oily fish about 2 times a week. In the early years nutrition guidelines, it says to bring in some oily fish once every 3 weeks. We actually know that the vast majority of children in this country are not eating oily fish at all, or very, very infrequently. So it says in the guidelines, minimum once every 3 weeks. As a nutritionist, I would say try to get oily fish on your menu more frequently than that for those that eat fish. Obviously, be careful with allergies, and obviously your vegetarian children potentially might not be eating fish if they're not pescatarian. We also get it in seafood. Chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts, less likely to have those in your setting, particularly the walnuts, of course. And we also get it from organic whole dairy, from grass-fed animals, wild and grass-fed meat. And, a lot of our families just can't afford organic dairy and organic or wild meat. And we do get a little bit in dark green leafy veg. So you can see from this list why, a lot of the children that we work with are likely to be not getting enough omega-3 in their diet. And it is so, so, so vitally important for our brain development. For the non-fish eaters, but also for everybody, chia seeds are a really nice way to get some omega-3 in. Obviously, when you buy seeds are a little bit of a grey area because they're often packed in the same factory as nuts. So you're always going to see a may contain warning on the back. That doesn't mean they contain nuts, but there could be some cross-contamination. So potentially in larger settings, you might not want to be having seeds like that in your setting. Maybe in a smaller setting, if you know that you don't have any nut allergies and your children are all eating nuts, then it might not matter so much. If you want to get some chia seeds in, there is this brand called Creative Nature. They do allergen-free chia seeds, so they're guaranteed to be nut-free. It's the only brand I can find in the UK that's guaranteed for their seeds to have no cross-contamination. So you could pop those into porridge, you could add them into baking. They shouldn't be given raw, particularly to children, because they can swell a lot in the stomach. So you want to cook them into porridge, or you want to use them in your baking or something like that. Or you can make chia puddings where you soak them overnight. You can put different berries and things in there as well. They're great to keep the bowel moving as well. And eggs do contain healthy fats as well. That yolk is a really good source of healthy fats as well, and really important for neurodivergent children to be getting the choline that we get in egg yolks. We also get choline in fish and organ meats like liver. Most of us don't eat that anymore, do we? Soya, sunflower seeds, quinoa, peanut butter. It's a really, really important nutrient. I've got no problem with eating liver, by the way. Actually, it's a superfood, but just most of us don't eat it anymore. It's not so common, is it? But egg yolks are one of the easiest ways to get choline into our children's diet. So where you don't have an egg-free zone in your setting, they're really, really good foods to include. And of course, we get other healthy fats in things like olive oil, olives, avocados, nuts and seeds and things like that. Yeah. Now, of course, I've talked a little bit about restrictive eating today, which is one of my specialist areas. We do see some children who are neurodivergent who really kind of crave food on a sensory level. They use it for that sensory pleasure. You do see particularly a lot of autistic and ADHD children who struggle with weight management. They put on weight and they're overweight. Yeah, and that's not to say we all need to be a certain shape or size, but obviously we have to be thinking about supporting and protecting health when weight does get out of control. And you can see that with some neurodivergent children because they don't seem to have an off switch. Or you see it with ADHD children where they and I've seen this a lot with my family and the kids that I work with, where don't feel hungry, too busy, too busy, too busy, don't feel hungry, don't feel hungry, and then I'm so hungry I can't stop eating. That's quite a common thing to see as well, because often children, neurodivergent children, really struggle with interoceptions. It's really in understanding and knowing those internal cues. So if you have children that you work with that really don't seem to have an off switch or really use food for sensory pleasure, really think about that meal plate, about that blood sugar balance. If you can give them foods that are going to be much more slowly digested, that's going to help them to feel fuller and stay fuller for longer. So what that means then is getting in that protein with every meal. That means getting in those more complex carbohydrates rather than white carbohydrates. It's getting in plenty of vegetables, some healthy fats as well, really important. And don't forget protein at breakfast, particularly for your neurodivergent children. It's really important, particularly for ADHDers, to have some protein with breakfast. And it's one of the areas, one of the meals where protein is really often neglected. It's not put in, if you think classically, often cereals, toast, that kind of thing, crumpets, there's not a lot of protein. So where could you get some protein? Could it be some eggs? Could it be some yogurt? Could it be some chia seeds in the porridge, for example? Just trying to find some ways to get some protein in with that breakfast, or recommending if a child's having breakfast at home, things like smooth peanut butters on whole grain toast, that kind of thing, just to try to get that protein in. So let's move on to talking about the microbiome and the gut-brain axis, which is a really, really important thing when we're talking about neurodivergence. The gut-brain axis, so a big part of that does come from our gut microbiome. So are you aware that you are more bacterial DNA than you are human DNA within your body? We have more bacterial cells than we do have human cells. And a big part of that is in our digestive system, particularly in the large intestine. We have, as adults, about 4 pounds of bacteria in our gastrointestinal tract, particularly in that large intestine. And they're really, really important for our health. We tend to hear so much about bacteria being bad, but actually this collection of organisms are so vital for our health. We have microbiomes all around our body, from our skin to our mouth to our urinary tract. But the gut microbiome is one of the largest and most researched microbiomes that we have as humans. And they influence this microbiome influences so many aspects of our health, from our metabolism to our cognitive function, our mental health. We make 95% of our serotonin is made in our gut, and we make 50% of our dopamine in our gut. And a lot of that does come from the actions of the gut microbiome. Now, disturbances in our gut microbiome can really impact our mental health and our neurological function, our cognitive function, through what's called the gut-brain axis. And there's about 50 routes by which, well, more than 50 routes by which our microbes, our organisms, our bacteria, fungi, yeast that we have in there produce compounds that impact the brain. So there's a multi-factorial pathways that happen through neurotransmitters, by all the serotonin that is made in the gut, through different nerves, particularly the vagus nerve. And actually what I find really fascinating is most of the messages are going up rather than coming down. So actually the gut is maybe more powerful than your brain. I mean, that's quite, incredible to think about. That's why we tend to call our gut our second brain, right? And the gut microbiome can even drive our food choices and our feelings and our emotions. And there's a lot of research into the gut microbiome and neurodivergence. What we see is that neurodivergent individuals tend to have different patterns and collections of organisms in their gut microbiome compared to neurotypical people. We often see a reduced diversity, so lack of variety, and that is often associated with poorer gut health and poor communication between the gut and the brain. And we see imbalances in bacterial populations. So we tend to see more potentially harmful bacteria, like high levels of Clostridium, and lower levels of those perhaps more beneficial ones like Bifidobacterium lactobacillus that you might have heard of. And these changes in the gut microbiome, researchers said, are potentially linked to some of the gut disturbances that you see in neurodivergent individuals. I'm sure for those of you that work with children who are neurodivergent, you might have seen a higher incidence of gut issues like constipation, diarrhea, that kind of thing. And actually, what some research has shown is that those gut disturbances and those changes in the gut microbiome also seem to be linked to some of the things that we see outside of the gut, like poor sleep, neurological challenges, mood disturbances, anxiety, and food sensitivities. Higher incidence of food sensitivities and allergies in neurodivergent children. So I won't go through all of these, but there are some really fascinating studies that are being done, particularly with probiotic supplementation, that has shown some potential benefit to getting in some beneficial bacteria, particularly in the areas of hyperactivity and impulsivity for ADHD and autistic children, and evidence for using some multi-strain probiotics rather than single strain, and combining prebiotics and probiotics. But there's a lot that we can do with diet. And one of the key things for supporting a healthy gut microbiome is diversity. I like to think of the gut microbiome like a garden, and we want lots and lots of different flowers in there. And if we have a more varied diet, lots and lots of different plant foods, and that's going to feed a more diverse and robust gut microbiome. Now, of course, in your restrictive eaters, that's going to be more challenging, isn't it? But trying to get in those dark pigments, particularly things like blueberries, really, really helpful for the gut microbiome and the gut-brain axis. And just looking at every eating opportunity as a way to add in more diversity. Can you get in more fiber? Can you get in more diversity of foods? And I think this toast is kind of a really nice, easy way to think about it. You know, if you've got a bit of toast with a bit of, I don't know, cream cheese or hummus or whatever you're putting on it, you can add different toppings, right? It's about just trying to get all those different nutrients in there as much as you possibly can. Some more ideas to encourage variety in the gut microbiome. So adding in different vegetables and fruits. I'm going to make sure that these come out in the slides to you. I went through some of these last time, but it's about trying to encourage the children that you work with to have more of a rainbow way of eating. And herbs and spices also is a really good way to get in more diversity. And one more thing is probiotic foods. So a really easy one is live yogurt or kefir, which is a very fermented yogurt, which can be added to different meals and things like that. It's a great way to actually directly get that beneficial bacteria in. So more ideas there that I'll pop in that are in the slides that you can have a read through. So eating a rainbow of real foods is really, really important. Just going to scroll forwards. Oh yeah, and just one more final thing I mentioned last time, but getting outside, getting a bit dirty, getting out in nature, really, really important for the health of our gut microbiome. So we're going to finish off this evening talking about vitamins and minerals, the micronutrients. I've seen lots of comments coming up in the chat, and I will get to those in a moment when we come to our Q&A. So micronutrients, this is your vitamins and your minerals. They work in synergy, so they work together in harmony. So for example, zinc and copper need to be in balance, and that's particularly important, those two minerals, when it comes to neurodivergence, because that can have a big impact on our dopamine levels. We need vitamin C to absorb iron, for example. We need magnesium and vitamin D to absorb calcium. We need vitamin D to absorb iron. So what I'm trying to tell you by that is, again, it's that trying to get diversity within the diet will make sure that we're getting a nice broad spectrum of lots of different vitamins and minerals, because they work in harmony and they work together. So coming back to that idea of what can I add in? What can I help this child? What can I add in just to make this meal or the children that I work with just a little bit more nutritionally valuable? So I'm going to zoom in on 4 or 5 different key nutrients. I'm not going to go through all the vitamins and minerals because not only would that be boring, but we're not going to have time tonight. But I just want to zoom in on a few really, really key vitamins and minerals. Now, magnesium, one of the most common mineral deficiencies in children, and over 90% of ADHDers potentially need more magnesium. And magnesium, the effect of magnesium has been particularly seen when children are deficient. You really then see a benefit in terms of symptoms that might be being expressed, particularly with ADHD. It's so important for our nervous system, our bowel movement, because it stimulates our muscles. So it's really important for that kind of peristaltic movement, that rhythmical movement in our gut that helps our body move, all the waste out. It's really important for our immune system, sleep, energy, and blood sugar control. So a lot of the challenges we do see in neurodivergent children. Deficiency signs include tics. And you do see, children that are on ADHD medication sometimes can develop tics, and that can potentially be exacerbated when there is a magnesium deficiency. Anxiety, fidgetiness, restless legs, constipation, muscle aches, hyperactivity, hungry before meals, those eye twitches that you can get can be a deficiency of magnesium as well. Some research here, magnesium deficiency in blood, hair, and red blood cells found in 95% of children with ADHD aged 7 to 12. So it's a really big amount. This is quite an old study now. So you can really think about getting magnesium in the diet. So things like dark green leafy veg, your broccoli, your spinach, your kale, getting those into meals as much as you possibly can. So it might be a soup, for example, or you might do a broccoli cheese, or you might add in broccoli to an omelette or something like that. Nuts and seeds, fish and seafood, whole grains, avocado, beans, lentils, bananas, dried fruit, just a little bit, not too much, dark chocolate, obviously just a little bit, not too much, but it is nutritionally valuable when it's like 75, 80% and above. But obviously not too much for small children, can be a little bit stimulatory, but it's fine to use a little bit, or a bit of dark cacao. And you can actually absorb magnesium really well through your skin. Obviously, as practitioners, it's not your place to recommend supplements, but I like to just make people aware we absorb magnesium really well through our skin. So Epsom salts or magnesium salts in the bath. There are some really nice children's brands like Better You that do magnesium salts for children that can be popped into the bath. Iron, we looked at iron looking at that dopamine diagram that I showed you above there. So we really need that iron to be able to make dopamine. It's really important for our energy levels to transport oxygen around the body. Low levels of iron are linked with ADHD, oppositional behavior, and that's with low iron stores, that's your ferritin. Optimal iron status may be really important to support response to ADHD medication as well. And it's really important to balance copper, lead, and toxic heavy metals. Potential iron deficiency clues. I mean, obviously, lots of these things can relate to many other factors, but these are kind of a cluster of symptoms, clues that might mean that someone's low in iron. If a child is eating very high beige, ultra processed food diet, it's likely that they're not getting enough iron in their diet. Also, high dairy intake. And you see that for young children that are developing neurodivergence, they really struggle to move off milk. High levels of calcium can inhibit iron absorption, so you might see more incidents of iron absorption. And supporting a child with iron levels is really critical, because actually deficiency of iron at young age can actually lead to some irreversible damage in how our brain develops. So it's absolutely critical to make sure that we're getting enough iron in at a young age. Obviously, if the child is vegan or vegetarian, you're likely to see lower levels of iron. So you really need to make sure you're getting some iron in. Pale skin, I mean, obviously we're all different colors, aren't we? But very, very pale skin. Fatigue, that those children that just don't seem to recover after exercise, shortness of breath, hair loss, brittle nails. Pica, something we'll just talk a little bit more about in a couple of weeks, is when children eat non-food items. There can be many reasons why they do that, but that can be linked to low iron and low zinc. Sore tongue, frequent tummy aches, and lack of appetite can also be linked to low iron. So here are your really good sources of iron that you can include. Of course, red meat, dark poultry meat. So using the chicken legs, not just chicken breast, you're going to have more iron in a chicken leg or a chicken thigh. Liver and other organs. You can put liver into bolognese, you can put liver into all kinds of stews and things like that. It's a great superfood. Seafood, fish, lentils, soybeans, pulses, nuts and seeds, dark green leafy veg. I mean, they're kind of the answer to so many things, dark green leafy veg. Whole grains, oats, quinoa, lots and lots of things on there. Parsley and fresh green herbs. And obviously we need vitamin C rich foods in there as well to support iron absorption. And then zinc is one of the most important minerals when we're talking about neurodivergent. Neurodivergent children are absolutely prone to low zinc. Not always, but in a lot of cases. We don't want every child and every parent to be going out there supplementing zinc when they don't know whether that is the case, but we would want to be working on getting enough zinc into the diet is really, really important because we need it to make and utilize dopamine. Now, zinc acts as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. What does that mean? What it means is it's helping to keep the dopamine around for longer, which is one of the actions of some of the ADHD medications that can be used. And it's really, really important to help keep that, not only to make dopamine, but to help keep it around for longer so it has more of an effect in the brain. Immune system support for growth. And really interesting here, when you see children go through growth spurts, often they can become deficient in zinc because we use a lot of zinc to grow. So when a child's gone through a growth spurt, you can sometimes see a bit of regression in their symptoms or in their behavior. It's a really, really common thing to see, and it might be because they've got a little bit zinc deficient as they've done lots of growing. And obviously, if a child's got restrictive eating, they could potentially become deficient in zinc. And low zinc can exacerbate the problem because we need zinc for our sense of taste and smell. So as a child restricts their eating more and more and more, they become more and more zinc deficient, which can affect their sense of taste and smell even more. So then that's that downward spiral of restrictive eating. Also, low appetite often could be linked to low zinc, and low dietary variety can cause low zinc as well. Signs of zinc deficiency, lots of things. Pica being another one of them. Poor appetite, particularly children that don't want to eat in the morning. A lot of sensory issues around food can be exacerbated by low zinc. White spots on lots and lots of the fingernails. Slow growth. That's why we often see in children with celiac that they're quite small because the celiac disease can impact their absorption of zinc. Zinc is really, really important for growth, as I said. And loose bowels and frequent tummy upsets, again, symptoms that we commonly see in autistic children, could certainly exacerbate problems because you could end up with a zinc deficiency as well. Here's some lovely sources of zinc: meat, fish, shellfish, whole grains, dairy, eggs, seeds of any kind, particularly pumpkin seeds, nuts, mushrooms, beans, and legumes. So you might not have nuts in your setting, but these are things you could potentially communicate with your families that you work with. You might do a newsletter, and you might do a key nutrients for children's health or for children's brain development, and you might zoom in on zinc one week and show them how to use these foods, for example. Communicating with home is also going to be really important because if you can work together as a team on nutrition, it will make your life much, much easier. Okay, we're nearly out of time, but I'm going to just quickly mention vitamin D. Vitamin D is absolutely vital. We can't respond to serotonin without enough vitamin D, and we can't make dopamine without enough vitamin D. It's really, really important for our brain health. The UK government advise all children under 5 to take vitamin D supplements. If a baby is having formula or a young child is having formula, there probably already is some vitamin D in there. If they're not having formula, then they probably should be looking at a vitamin D supplement. And I would advise them to ask their health visitor or their doctor or their pharmacist about the most appropriate supplement. It is estimated over 80% of the population are low or deficient in vitamin D, particularly this time of year. How many of you are taking vitamin D? Where do we get our vitamin D? We get it from the sunshine, right? It's the action of sun on our skin is the most important source of vitamin D. So we should be storing it, during the summer, and it should take us over to the next spring. However, in the UK, we don't get particularly enough sun here in the higher latitudes. And other risk factors, if you have darker skin, you're much more likely to be a slow absorber of vitamin D. If you cover your skin, obviously, or children that cover their skin, not going to be getting so much vitamin D. If you wear, and it's important to protect your skin, but if you have to wear a very high factor sun cream all year round, you're potentially not going to be getting enough vitamin D. And it's very genetic how much we absorb, okay? So I'm just going to scroll forward, but vitamin D is not only important for neurotransmitter balance, we need it for strong bones because we can't absorb calcium without vitamin D. So I think we're nearly there. I'm just going to touch on restrictive eating, but this is the topic for our webinar in a couple of weeks' time. As I said, it's one of my specialist areas. I work in a couple of SEND schools where I support children one-on-one and in groups who are neurodivergent and have very restrictive eating patterns. And it's something I specialise a lot in my one-to-one clinic. It's an area I'm really passionate about because I've gone through it with my own teenager as well, and I know how challenging and difficult it is. But I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that might be exacerbating restrictive eating, just to be aware of, because they're quite simple things that you can have a look at. So sensory issues we've talked about might be exacerbated by nutrient deficiency. So it is that kind of slippery downward slope. Obviously not your place to recommend vitamins and mineral supplements, but you might suggest that they talk to their health visitor or to their doctor about whether there might be some nutrient deficiencies. Zinc is not one that is tested particularly commonly on the NHS unless there's really good reason for it to be tested. But they often test iron. They'll often test vitamin D. I mean, the question is it worth putting a young child through a blood test? Of course, that can be very traumatic. So we just have to weigh up, the risk versus what is going to be beneficial for the child. Another thing to look out for is poor oral muscle tone. And this can be a feature of neurodivergence. We see a lot of hypermobility in neurodivergent people, but also can be because of restrictive eating from a young age. They've never really developed that ability to chew particularly well, or if they weren't weaned correctly and didn't get moved on to solid foods, you're likely to see that poor oral muscle tone, which might be contributing to restrictive eating. So doing some activities where you get them to drink through a curly straw, only water, drinking through a curly straw, but it needs to be one of those really thin ones. So not like, a McDonald's sized straw, like a really thin curly straw, or get them to blow ping pong balls across a table. It's another really nice way to build up that oral muscle strength. Think about tooth health. Does this child have poor oral health? Have they got rotten teeth? Is it causing them pain? Gut problems, constipation. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced constipation, but if you're very constipated, it can be very, very painful and you don't want to eat. You just feel full and it's painful in the tummy and lower bowel. A lot of children who are neurodivergent do have sore tummies and that can exacerbate restrictive eating. And of course, anxiety impacts our appetite and our food choices. You tend to see an exacerbation of sensory challenges when there is heightened anxiety. So you might see it more in transition times, or if there's stuff going on at home, for example, that really can impact our eating. So just a few tips I've popped in the slides today, but as I said, if you want to focus more on restrictive eating, please come to the webinar in a couple of weeks' time. I get a lot of really, practitioners tell me it's really, really helpful for them, lots of practical guidance in there. But things you can think about that you might want to start on, really understanding what is the texture and the sensory need of that child. Like, is it that they like crunchy foods? Do they like smooth and liquid foods? Is it a particular colour that they like? And really working on trying to food chain around those sensory needs. So if they're like a brown and crunchy kind of, taste, can you put different things on toast? Can you try pancakes? Can you try waffles? Could you make a homemade version of their favourite chicken nugget or fish finger to make it healthier? Could you, if they have a favourite vegetable, could you try getting that, in different ways? Because what I'll teach you in a couple of weeks' time is that often children that have restrictive eating patterns, they often have a higher disgust response. You do often see children gagging at the sight of foods that they don't like. And the more they're away from those foods, the more that disgust response can be ingrained. Now, if you have a child that is a very extreme restrictive eater, I really do encourage you to come to that training in a couple of weeks, because we have to be very careful with more extreme restrictive eaters how we approach this, because we do not want them to lose their acceptable foods. And I'm talking children that have maybe 10, 15 foods that they eat. I've seen children with 5 foods that they eat. And of course, we have to keep them eating. We absolutely cannot start messing about with their acceptable foods. We've got to keep them eating them. But there are lots of strategies you can use to help increase and support that increase of the variety that they eat. So I'll finish up there this evening because it is 8 o'clock. But like I said, if you want to learn more, that is the webinar that we've got coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And I think Nicola will put the link in for you so that you can join that. And let's open up for any questions.